The White House once again blamed Republicans for skyrocketing prices. Price of oil is about 40% higher today than when Biden first took office. Joining me right now is North Dakota Senator Kevin Cramer. He's a member of the Armed Services, Banking, Veterans Affairs, and Environmental and Public Works Committees. Senator, it's great to see you. Thanks very much for being here. What do you say to Karine Jean-Pierre, who answers Edward Lawrence with it's the Republicans' fault?
Well, every day, Maria, that I watch her do her briefings, I have some admiration for the fact that she's willing to stand out and talk to people who know a lot more about what she's talking about than she does and still go to work. All of that said, economics 101. I mean, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about basic economics. And to even still call that bill the Inflation Reduction Act, knowing full well that what it did is fueled inflation, demonstrates just how desperate they are. But for talking points, she couldn't talk at all, I'm afraid. Anyway, good on Ed to ask the question.
I spoke with your colleague, Joe Manchin, on Sunday, and he continues to say that the Inflation Reduction Act is reducing inflation, and that it's an oil security bill, and it's not a green agenda bill. What do you say?
Well, it's exactly a green agenda bill. There's nothing in there for oil. I mean, nothing in there that would help oil. The reason oil right now is so high priced, of course, is because the administration and this president specifically has made it more difficult to drill. We should be at about 15 million barrels per day in the United States of America. We should be selling a lot more abroad to our friends in Europe. We should be the price maker, not the price taker. This spread between WTI and Brent could be avoided by the United States, by the WTI being really the index that the world watches. And I know there's going to be some bringing of those two indexes together, but really, we could be producing for the world. They should be able to rely on us, not have to rely on enemies and frenemies, if you will, for oil supply. But it also raises the bigger point, and that is this. Anytime energy prices are high, inflation will be high. Energy goes into everything we produce, everything we manufacture, everything we grow, everything that's shipped, everything in the supply chain. Maria, really, inflation is largely driven by the price of energy.
Yeah, and that's why this whole of government approach toward this climate change agenda is so troubling. And, I think the American people are onto this because now the Biden administration apparently is quietly revising a federal database that now says that the number of unused and approved oil permits is actually less than 6,700, not the 9,000 as the president keeps touting. He keeps saying, and when he blames oil companies for the high price of oil, he says, we've got 9,000 leases out there, and the oil companies aren't doing anything with it. Well, I actually asked the chairman and CEO of Chevron, Mike Wirth, about this in December. Watch what he says about this so-called 9,000 leases. Watch.
I don't know anything about this 9,000 lease number. I don't know where it comes from. We don't have anything even approaching a fraction of that. When we get a lease, it just begins a process where we have to acquire a number of permits.
And as you know, Senator, your state is an oil-producing state. It's the permitting process that is stopping more flow because of all of the bureaucracy and new regulations that Biden has put in place. Isn't that right?
That's exactly right, particularly when you're talking about offshore and onshore, federal leases, which North Dakota, the heart of the Bakken is federal land, even though most of the Bakken is not, fortunately for us. But Mike Wirth, as you know, is not prone to exaggeration at all. He is a right down the middle guy and gets it. But this issue of applications for permits to drill on federal lands, they have slow walked that to the point where you can hardly afford to go through the process. Plus, you have many steps in the federal bureaucracy. Besides the Bureau of Land Management, you end up with the Corps of Engineers, EPA, in some cases the United States Department of Agriculture if it's forest lands or grasslands, and they have a lot of ways to slow this thing down. But even on the lease issue, they're wrong. The state of North Dakota was just in federal court last week or the week before, suing over the leases, the legally obligated leases that the president has held up for many quarters now. So they're talking out of, well, really, I'd say both sides of their mouth, except they're just basically telling lies.
Yeah, really interesting what has taken place. All right, Senator, I want to get your take on your bill. You have a Fair Access to Banking Act that you have been introducing. And, you know, the Florida Bankers Association is pushing back on this bill. Here's what Alex Sanchez, the president, told me. He says the bill by Senator Cramer requiring banks to bank certain industries is wrong and troubling. A bank should bank customers based on its risk or business profile, not on an order of the government. We're going from one extreme to the other, putting banks on par with Chinese banks, where the government tells the banks who and who they should not bank. So, Senator, what do you want to say about that? Because I think your intentions were to stop this industry from blowing off fossil fuel companies, which, of course, is what the Biden administration is trying to do. But does this go a step too far? Please weigh in on what Sanchez is saying.
Yeah, I think Mr. Sanchez is probably reading it just a little wrong. My bill doesn't require anybody to bank anything. What it does is it prohibits banks from categorically discriminating against legal commerce by industry groups. In other words, you can't just say, we will not bank anything, any utility that uses coal-generated electricity. We'll prohibit lending to a gun manufacturer or an ammunition sales retailer because of this one industry that's out of favor, but it's legal commerce. And remembering, these banks aren't exactly on their own. These are FDIC insured. These are taxpayer-backed institutions, and so they have an obligation, I think, not to bank everything that I want them to bank, but to do exactly what Mr. Sanchez says, and that is take a risk analysis loan by loan, application by application, not just kick an entire category out because they're a disfavored group or disfavored industry by liberals.
Well, thank you. That is a really appropriate and practical answer to that. It makes total sense to say you can't just pick out the gun owners, the groups, the lobbying groups, the fossil fuel groups, and say we're not going to bank that whole group. That's different. Senator, we appreciate you explaining it, and thanks very much for being here this morning.
Always my pleasure. Thank you, Maria.
All right, we'll see you soon, Senator. Kevin Cramer joining us this morning in Washington.